Hello, everyone. I hope you're doing well. I've had a weird last few days. I had to take care of some family business, and that entailed visiting a city where nobody really reads much. And the stuff that's on my mind, or the stuff that I like to think about, or the stuff that I think is related to the things I am pursuing in life, are pretty foreign there, and it's strange. And I'm kind of readjusting to the mental space I was in prior to that experience. Um, and the way we talk about politics today, the way we talk about political philosophy, if we even do that, which we have to in some regard. Anytime you speak about politics, you're being influenced by like 18th century liberal philosophy as an example. So it's not like political philosophy is something that doesn't have any bearing on everyday life. It in fact does. So I find that there have been times or places in the past where discussion over these matters, pardon me, has been far more interesting. And I thought a really good book that exemplifies this is this book I picked up a long time ago called Politics and Opinion in the 19th Century. It goes over some of the major intellectual developments of the 19th century that kind of set the stage for contemporary politics today. So some of the we can even look at some of the titles here, or some of the headers of the chapters. So we've got the originality of the Romantics, Herder and Hegel, steam, intellect, improvement, Bentham and Austin, the counter-revolutionaries, de Maistre, Coleridge, and Carlyle, Saint Simon, totalitarian and technocrat, Comte's secular religion, anarchists and utopians, Godwin, Fourier, Owen, Proudhon's attack on the state, humanitarian nationalism, Mazzini, the liberal compromise, de Tocqueville, John Stuart Mill. Then it's the mid-century prospect, the impact of Darwinism, the idea of progress, Herbert Spencer, Buckle, Lecky, the life of institutions, Maine, Bagot, I hope I said that right, Tyler, Neo-Hegelian humanism, T.H. Green, F.H. Bradley, Marx and Engels, unbridled nationalism, Trichke. I probably butchered that. I'm sorry, guys. The Cult of the Irrational, Schopenhauer and Nietzsche, Catholic Attitudes, the Encyclicals of Leo XIII, Acton, George Sorel, Myth and Anarchy, Social Democracy, the Fabians, William Morris, Bernstein, Juarez, Modern Sociologist, Durkheim on Environment, Graham Wallace in Social Psychology. This book kind of covers a lot of pretty deep and thorough thought that was happening in the 19th century. And I could speak. The thing is, I've spoken about these things in my private life so much where I'm almost like, oh boy, do I really want to get into it all over again. But it seemed like in the 19th century, society was changing so much, and people weren't distracted with phones. So if they had a mind and if they were spending their time reading, they could really chew on a ton and write a ton. And that's sort of the story of the 19th century. I sometimes regard it as I'd say a peak in literary culture insofar as it was more variegated and diverse than the 18th century, even though the quality of 18th century political writing was very good. In the 19th century, it was kind of extraordinary because of the amount of people who were participating, the amount of different perspectives, and the fact that what they were writing was a little, well, it's arguable, but more obviously influential just because of the normalcy of the printing press. By the 19th century, a lot of people were able to read, and so if a great thinker wrote something that challenged society at its foundations, more people would be exposed to this, and there was greater dynamism in that regard. It's not like in the 18th century when a lot of the important political philosophy was read by mostly elites who were kind of pursuing similar thoughts. And of course, that had an influence on the American revolutions and the French Revolution. But the 19th century was when things got really chaotic because the Industrial Revolution seemed to really be threatening the say normal conceptions of the purpose of the state, and the normal conceptions of what state success is. You throw Darwinism into that mix, and you're getting into a ton of uncertainty over mankind's place in the world and what the purpose of life even is, in a really destabilizing way. And then of course Nietzsche comes along at the end of the 19th century and I'd say very clearly outlines in many ways what the 20th and the 21st, I think, would be like, with this loss of traditional morality and this sort of power competition of people trying to use their wills to fill the void of meaninglessness in the West and elsewhere, I suppose. Anyways, the standard of discussion from these thinkers is very, very high, and it's perhaps it's not really realistic that this is a revived thing. We have to speak in such a manner that is deemed appropriate to others, and that entails to a significant extent absorbing the linguistic mores of and customs of our era, and the communicative mores and customs of this era, which is a very oratory based and kind of quick sort of culture where you sometimes have to be tasked with, or oftentimes are tasked with, speaking to people who have no clue about you can't expect every person to have be deeply committed to some intellectual inheritance that's been going on for centuries and centuries, or decades and decades and decades even. Anyways, so if you read stuff or thinking about stuff that isn't commonly a part of people's lives, it can be a little bit disorienting trying to engage with trying to bounce between these two worlds. So I had kind of the rug pulled from under me just interfacing with that. Although it does broaden one's perspective, you have to remember where the world is at present and what it's like and what the expectations are inside of it. I often find myself wondering, like, man, is it really worth having having a deeply intellectual life? Because there's a certain, again, not to sound like a Marxist, but the shadow of Marx is on the mind, because he's one of these dudes who left a huge mark on the 19th century and the 20th. But there are material conditions that sustain an intellectual life, in the sense that, for example, if you did want to only speak about very serious topics with an individual, you have to have a life where that's realistic, where that can be sustained. Where some of these topics, which might be a little bit, something about them tonally might be icky to a lot of people today, you have to find some way of avoiding that stuff, and that tends to be, that's like a problem for I'd say deeply intellectual and wealthy people who get locked into that method of discourse, that lifestyle, and the very sublunary, on the ground level concerns of the public seem kind of stupid in comparison, or don't really see a very adequate response where at a practical level. Where are people actually? What are the kinds of ideas that they want to hear, or that they regard as good for them? So it's a tension today, and I think there's a loneliness associated with being too intellectual all the time, unless, again, you can materially counteract those effects by having like a closed circle of people whom you speak to. But again, I find that I find that a little bit unrealistic today. It just doesn't seem like that's a bet that can be pursued, again, unless you have the unless you can afford to sort of socially craft yourself into this kind of person, and avoid, avoid having to be chill and relatable, and it's just not so doable. And again, loneliness is not is not the loneliness is a killer. I'll say that much. It just is. So, having said that, I'm just going through that experience. I'm just kind of rethinking what should be, like, what should I view as good in the world? What should I view as ideal? And then how should that inform how I act in the world, and what my plans are for myself? What kind of places should I engage with? What sort of communities should I seek to cultivate? What's realistic? What's a realistic exertion, for whatever principle it is in my mind that draws me towards books like this, and gives me the appetite for them and the ability to digest the ideas and speak about them. How can I render whatever principle that is conducive with life as it is at present for the majority? I've spoken in other videos about the tyranny of the majority, and I do think that's real, but it's unavoidable at present. And the risks associated with going about that conversation, being critical of majority thought, is very dangerous. And that was sort of loosely spoken about in my previous video, where I talked about being on stupidity's good side. And I think that that's kind of real. What I really mean by that is, if you're going to do something that's unconventional, there's a huge danger associated with pissing people off who just don't like even seeing that. Okay, if you even speak about philosophy, if you use words that they don't use in regular conversation, which and there's an angle here where it's not like oh, they're stupid and so they don't like this stuff. Sometimes that's true. Sometimes that just is true. It just is. But it's also like other people are like, well, in my life, maybe I have an aptitude for this stuff, but it's not the case that my life turned out in such a manner where this is a regular, that I need to sharpen my mind in this particular regard. And that can cultivate resentment, where it seems as though somebody who pursues these loftier conversational topics, is like there's a there's some anger associated with that, where it's like, man, I could do that, I could do, but then I had this and this problem happened, and you know what I'm talking about. This is just a real thing, and it deepens. It can be a huge problem, and there's a ways in which you just try and keep away from that stuff. But like I've said, I don't think that's very realistic, especially today when everybody wants to get insight into everything going on in every person's life. And if it's alien to what they're used to, their instinct is hostility. Which to me, like, I can explain this stuff back to myself, and I'm like, and I can go over some of the thoughts that I've had previously in relation to this kind of dynamic, where I'm like, that's just animalistic. It really is. It's like, if you react to something that is foreign to what you're used to with hostility, like, you're kind of like an animal. Like, somebody's put a mirror in front of you and you see this, you're like, what the fuck? It's like, that's kind of what it is. Okay? It just is. And I am comfortable expressing that because there are people out there who act this way and who know better. And so I'll share that. But yeah, I mean, what? Am I to be faulted for, the fact that I don't want to talk about, I'm going to fall into so many stereotypes, but there's things there's things that people spend their regular, days consuming and doing that I just don't have interest in. I'm sorry. It doesn't get me going. Other things get me going. All right. And if that's upsetting to some people, fine, we can call a truce. I'm not going to get angry at you for the sort of mass entertainment stuff that you do. Look, I'll wear the fucking Mickey Mouse shirt. I'll wear. I actually like Disney, like classic Disney. Actually, I'm not too hostile to that. But it's like, okay, fine, but just leave me alone. Okay, don't start, putting the fucking needle in me, and I won't start, scheming against you, where I regard your habits and the things that you do. I'm not you, the internet audience. This is stuff that like in my personal life and yeah. But I'm not gonna. Fine, be chill, I'll be chill, okay? But, Otherwise, what are we doing? If there's no appetite, no kind of general, if higher conversation, okay, isn't regularly expected in society, or if there's not even like a regular understanding that that has a place. So, for example, people like a doctor. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a medical doctor. Okay, I don't know how medicine works. Okay, or I haven't studied the body at the level that you need to understand it in order to operate on it in the 21st century and diagnose things and come like that's pretty elusive to me. Okay, but when a doctor like talks to me about whatever field he's in and sort of makes these judgments and whatnot, I understand that there has to be like a place for that. I'm like, okay, that's not my world. All right, it's interesting. I'd like to learn more about it if I had the opportunity. But like, I understand that's what the doctor does. Okay, and I'm using the term medical doctor because people go and they get doctorates and all this stuff. But like what I mean. Even in regular conversation, like a doctor is typically referencing a medical doctor. It's like, okay, we have an understanding that that's something that doctors do. There's something that exists also even for what lawyers do. That's something even that exists to some extent for what a professor does or something of this nature. I don't know why it's like we at the same time there's recognition of that fact. Maybe it's a philosophy thing where philosophy is supposedly there's precedent for whether or not a lot of key philosophers believe this or where they stood in the issue, but typically it's meant to be in some regard, in an ideal sense, for every person, right? Philosophy is a sort of broadening of the discourse. In Plato's Meno dialogue, I think that's communicated quite well. It's this idea that there is knowledge within us. Where it comes from is tricky. It's not always something that you can excavate for through ratiocination. There's like a mythology associated with this, where if your soul was the kind of soul that perceived the true forms of the world and the true form of beauty, as an example, you will be able to recollect knowledge and truth and beauty, but you have to be guided through the discursive method, and that's a method that is not the monopoly of sophists and demagogues. It is something that could be within any person, and So the point of philosophy, in this sense, in this classical tradition, is that you get to speak and criticize things that are common, and you get to pick these things apart and explore them, and you will discover knowledge within you that you already held, but you wouldn't be able to do this without the philosophic method. So this is, to me, like I meet a lot of people who are familiar with this idea, and they have this understanding that this is something that so then every single individual can participate in the philosophical project. What you find is, in actuality, reality is a lot more complex, and not every person is geared towards having a mind that can I say be appreciative of that stuff at all. And you have to acknowledge that these people exist in the world, and it can be easy to be hostile, but It again, reality is reality. It's just not unwise. It's not wise to react to this very common occurrence, the stubbornness in society, in an ugly way that causes problems for you. And that's again why I say be on the good side. Be on the good side of this stuff, which feeds into another philosophical tradition, which is that of esotericism, which is the idea that even among the intellectuals. There are certain standards and rules and expectations for how to act, and some truths are too powerful for everyday people, certainly, and even the intelligentsia of a particular era. There's this idea that philosophers throughout time have been speaking esoterically, where there's an exoteric meaning, what the passage seems to mean at a first reading, and then there are little clues buried within the text that are meant to signal to an intelligent reader that there's a hidden meaning. That you can only get through very critical thought, which is the sort of private and more elitist aspect of philosophy, which is the understanding that truth is not equally. Truth cannot be received equally. It just cannot, and I think that's Again, if the language of that seems a little bit disturbing given the popular philosophical attitudes of the day, I think if you sit and think about that, it's quite true, and every person can probably point towards some instance in their life where they've recognized this to be true. Anyways, I've been thinking about that because again, this is, yeah. I mean, it's just these are common ideas in the history of Western thought, and if you I also understand at the same time a lot of people don't give a shit about any of this, and it upsets them. So that's just kind of I'm reeling in from that. Anyways, have a good one, guys.